Hi everyone, I just wanted to give a quick intro and context to these videos. So I have a friend locally here who I play Digimon and Magic and some other stuff with who has expressed interest in WIXOSS. And obviously the game is 2 years old at this point, recently hit the anniversary or about to hit it, something like that. And we were playing and he sort of asked me offhand, like, is there a list of staples or anything like that out there? And I kind of thought and I was like, there's kind of not. So I made a bunch of them, one for each color and one for multicolor and colorless. And we basically went through it and recorded. It was sort of like a live stream thing. So it ended up being a lot longer than I thought. So I'm going to split these up into one for each color and then one for colorless slash multicolored. And I will also post the lists for all of them below if you wanted to check them out and see. There are some cards that I did not put in here and I forgot as we were going through, and I caught some of them and I have updated some of the lists. But so yeah, if you are new to the game, trying to figure out what the good stuff is, what people are playing at the 2 year anniversary point, um, this should hopefully get you started. This is sort of like a primer for people who are coming in knowing nothing, just to get a quick idea of what's out there. So enjoy. So feel free to ask questions and interrupt whenever you want, because again, this is like it's going to be a lot of information. I'm going to try to go fast. I'm hopeful that I can get it done in like an hour, but there's a lot of cards to go through. Um,
Yeah, it's okay.
Also, I'm calling all of these staples. That's probably not the correct word because some of these are like reference cards for like interesting strategies or rules things to talk about, and it's going to be a case by case basis. But
Okay.
um, I figured we'd start with colorless and then just kind of work our way back through each of the different colors.
Okay. Yeah.
So starting with colorless, and the reason I mention that is because I know the first card on this list is Mugen. Uh, Mugen is not a good card. She's actually quite bad. The reason I have her in here is she is a colorless center Elric, which is the first time we've had one of these. And the reason that I put her in here is because you know the rules about color, right? Like color identities between Elrigs and cards in the deck.
What do you mean? Like you
So
can only have the same colors of the cards in your deck that you do Elrigs?
correct, yeah. So if you have like blue, red, white for your Elrigs, you cannot have a green card in the deck.
Yes.
Okay. Um, the reason and part of the reason why Mugen is bad, at least right now, and not that she gets better, but she's a colorless Elrig, so you actually just lose a color to play her as your center. And the reason I highlighted her is because there is a rule in Japan that changed shortly after not this up. There's a set that's coming out next Friday as a recording of this video. Not after this set, but the next one that came out, they actually changed the rule that you can use any colors regardless of what your Elrigs are. Um,
Oh.
so yeah, I put her in here as like a little
Okay.
reminder that like in the future, probably, possibly, we don't know yet. We actually haven't heard confirmation yet whether that's going to be happening or when. A lot of people assume it's going to be happening, but it's just something to look out for in the future. There's a number of pieces that
Yeah.
get a lot better with that. Some of which we will look at in the individual color sections. I put them in their colors just because they're colored for basically these are split by color identity, using a magic term.
Yeah.
So so yeah, that's the only reason Mugen's here. She's also a double-sided Elrig, which is weird, but she's kind of awkward to use. She currently basically eliminates you using any powerful Dream Team pieces because she doesn't have color. There's a lot of reasons not to use her, but in the future, hopefully, um, we will get that ruling that the Japanese players have, and that's basically the whole reason why she's here. Um, so now we'll move on to these are all pieces. Some of these
Uh-huh.
are dream team pieces. We'll just sort of go by one by one. These first three, or actually these first two, are team specific pieces. So I know you've seen Endless Punchline. This is a card jockey piece. So you have to have Lion, Wolf, and Lovett as your Elrigs. And this is probably the most aggressive, damaging piece that there is right now because with this piece by itself, you can threaten to do two extra damage, literally for free because it doesn't even cost you any enter or anything. So it's a very powerful piece, but it requires a lot of deck building, and there are a few pieces. I don't remember if I put one up. I did. Okay. This piece, Mocking a Guardian Dragon, which we'll talk about in a minute, completely shuts down Endless Punchline. So there are reasons not to use Endless Punchline, and it's a little clunky and awkward, but it's still potentially a very powerful piece with the restrictions that you have to be in Card Jockey to use it. This next one is Trigger of Victory. This is a Deus Ex Machina piece. So the L-rigs for that are X, Machina, and Deus. We will talk about all three of them because they are three of the most individually powerful L-rigs in the game. Some of them both as centers and as assists. Machina is probably one of, if not the strongest individual assist L-rig in the game. And then Deus and X both have powerful centers and assists that we can use. So it's basically the case of where all three L-rigs are individually powerful, and this piece is also very powerful because all it does is you play it on main phase and you just crush a life cloth, and then you add a card back to your hand. But the typical use case with this is you play this before you play anything, because then you crush the cloth and you see what the life burst is, because sometimes life bursts can really mess up your plays and bounce things back to your hand. So the fact that you can do this on main phase before you've literally committed any resources to either removing Signy, because if they flip into Akufuku, like, now you know that you don't have to remove any lanes. Exactly. Yeah. So this is a very powerful piece. It costs an enter, but it crushes a life cloth and it gets you a card back. And again, you have to use the DXM team, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because they are very powerful Elrics. This one is Go to the Top. It's one of the earlier pieces. You have to have a white and a red Elrig. It basically is a search for any Signy, and it burns your opponent for 3 enter. So it's quote-unquote free, because even though it costs you 3 in terms of like net enter, you're paying 3, you're burning them 3, which is actually a really powerful rate. Additionally, it can hit anything. Most of the enter burn in this game that you'll see is it only hits colors that are different from the opponent's center. So a lot of the enter burn effects you'll see actually specific. They don't target if the enter shares a color with their center Elrig. But this one can hit anything regardless of color. And it's the kind of thing that if you're playing a really aggressive deck and you have access to it, you basically use this, burn all their enter, and now they can't assist grow, and you can swing in for lethal potentially. So
that's
definitely something to keep an eye out for. Super Halesta Saber it's the similar vein. Instead of requiring white and red like Go to the Top, this requires a white and a black. You get a white Signy, a black Signy, and a colorless Signy. Colorless is basically always a guard, but even still, recurring a guard is very powerful. And then it's just whatever white and black Signys you want. One of the things that we'll talk about at some point certainly is most people agree that the most powerful combination of colors in the game is Esper, so white, black, and blue. So this is typically a like supplementary piece to them, because you have the white and the black. You can get 2 cards back and a guard and basically build your field however you want, regardless of what the game state is, because probably all those cards are going to be in your trash, and you can just set up exactly what you need at any given point. Ancient Echo requires red, blue, and green. It's a little awkward, but it does open a lane. It draws you cards, and the power boost is mostly irrelevant. But the fact that it vanishes and draws 2 cards, to help set up your turn. 2 enter is a little expensive for this kind of effect, but it doesn't cost the Dream Team piece. So if you happen to be in these colors, it's kind of a no-brainer. The hard part is just red and green are not 2 great colors right now, so you don't see a lot of it, but it's the kind of thing that if you are in those colors, it's kind of a no-brainer. Azure Black Gaia requires a blue and a black. Your opponent discards 2 cards at random, and then you can salvage up to 2 Signy without a guard, whose total level is equal to the level of Signy discarded. So it's a little bit of hand control, a little bit of recursion. It keeps your hand filled, so you can kind of be more aggro if you need to. And then, again, if you're trying to stifle out what they're doing, or it's also a way, the fact that they're discarding cards at random is actually a big deal, because a lot of the discard in this game is not random, so they just, get rid of whatever cards they need or they don't need, and you're like stripping them resources, so to speak, but they're not like meaningful resources. But if it's a random, you can hit servants, which is a big deal. So, potentially hitting a servant and, whatever is potentially more impactful than hitting like 2 level 3s to get back whatever you want. So, it's a little expensive at 3, but there are a lot of decks that make pretty good use out of this piece. So, Moving on to Xenocluster is it's one of the more prolific pieces. You can basically put this piece in any deck. Basically, it either draws you one or enter charges you one. But if you've had cards discarded, instead of one, it draws you three. If you've had enter burned, instead of enter charging one, it can enter charge you three. So if you're in a deck that actually like really cares about having cards in hand, the kind of thing, like if you're in a deck where it's like, you know, one or two discard effects would completely shut you off because your hand would be empty, you can use this to keep your hand full. Conversely, if you're in a deck that has all the cards in the world but no enter, you can use this to basically build up your enter back. And this card is something to really look out for if you're using enter burn pieces like Go to the Top or other just generic enter burn or discard effects, because there's a lot of people who just like have splash discard effects to try to strip your hand out, and then you Xenocluster, and then you basically get an Ancestral Recall and fill your hand back up completely. So yeah, it's very commonly used as sort of a supplementary piece to whatever the dream pieces that they use are. End of the turn is not one that we see very frequently, but this is on here because it's unique in that it has spell cut-in timing. It has the main reason to run this is to counter the effect of target spell whose combined cost is 3 or less. So if your opponent casts a spell, you can actually use this to basically act as a free force of will to counter that spell. Additionally, it does salvage a card, which is not nothing. Salvaging is potentially pretty powerful, but it's the kind of thing where, you know, if there are certain decks, like Card Jockey is one of them, where the Good Dig, like, it very heavily relies on spells. So if you have a Good Dig that gets countered, then having that can really slow you down. So again, this is not one we see very often, but it's very unique, and it's really good to know that, okay, this card exists. Like, it's good to just remember that this is potentially a thing that can happen.
Yeah.
Burning Curiosity is another one of the more common sort of supplemental pieces because it's just costs a colorless, so you can put it in any deck. You can exceed 4, which exceeding is put that many cards from underneath of your various L-rigs into the L-rig trash as an additional cost. A lot of L-rigs setups just don't use their exceeds at all. Quick rule of thumb is you have a maximum of exceed 7 to use throughout the game, assuming your center L-rig is 3 and your 2 assists are level 2. You'll have basically 7 exceed worth underneath that you've leveled up through. So if you're not using that, it's a way to use that as a resource. Otherwise, it just vanishes as Signy. If you pay exceed 4, you remove it from the game, which is potentially, again, a big deal, because there are Signy that trigger when they get vanished. If your opponent is nearing a refresh, and also the fact that because when you vanish it, you give them enter by doing that. But if you remove it from the game, they don't get that enter. If they're about to refresh, they can never get that card back. So if you can hit something that's really powerful that you don't want to see again, it's a good way to just get rid of all that stuff. Innocent Battle is one it kind of has a little bit of popularity here and there. It basically just shuffles your trash into your deck and draw a card. It's mostly used to prevent refreshing, because refreshing is a very powerful form of damage. So if that's something you're worried about, you can splash this in and basically won't have to worry about any of that stuff. So there's a few decks that make pretty good use of this. Again, it's especially, this is one that goes into the more like good to know about if you're planning on building like a mill heavy deck, or if you're counting on a refresh to do a source of like 1 damage or something like that, just knowing that this is here. Like if you have a Phalaris setup, which is a card we'll see. I know you have seen it before, but Phalaris will mill 10 when it kills something. So if you have that set up and then they Innocent Battle, it's like, well, this Phalaris does nothing now. So yeah, it's again something just to keep aware.
It's in my Dama deck because it just drags the game out so long with all the guards.
Yeah. Machina Guardian Dragon, we talked about this briefly with Endless Punchline. The big thing with this, it costs, quote unquote, costs 0, but you have to either pay an enter or discard a card 3 times. And then if you do, whenever the opponent's L-rig attacks, it's negated, which is why the Endless Punchline is completely shut down, because if you just pay into the MGD for the whole turn, you just take no damage from the L-rig attack. And there's a few other, like, this is what also affects, like, Tama. If you restand Tama, you can basically use this as a way to get, like, 2 guards out of it, for example. Or, again, if you're using the Dash Harana, which is, I didn't pull the deck lists up. I was going to show you some decks, too, but Dash Harana can do like I don't know if the once per game counts as an Elric damage or not. It may. Anyway, this is a way to just kind of act as a guard in the Elric deck. It's a little expensive and pricey, but is potentially very powerful as well. And again, especially if you're playing card jockey, this is also something to be aware of. All right. Paradise Universe. This is a Cosmos specific piece. Basically, it turns all the Cosmos Signy care for the most part about looking at level ones. Depending on the card, it can either be in hand, on the field, in the trash, on the deck, whatever. This enables a lot of Cosmos strategies to actually work. At the moment, Cosmos isn't terribly powerful, but again, it's if it's one of the best supported types. I would say Cosmos is probably number 2 behind Atoms right now in terms of like if you wanted to build a tribal deck, Cosmos is one of the better ones to build, and it's just like almost entirely just because that this piece exists. All right. Don't Stop is whenever your opponent would guard, they have to additionally pay an enter or discard a card. I've had mixed success with this. This is, again, one that's like, if you're in a Tama deck that attacks with the Elric a lot, it's really powerful. I put it in Card Jockey, but usually my Card Jockey is very aggro, so they were just flush with enter, and they would just kind of pay into this. This is, again, this is one that's just kind of good to know that it exists. It's not seen very often at all, and a lot of times you can kind of play around it. Garden of Singularity is an interesting one. Basically, it allows you, instead of like using a guard, you can just discard 3 cards instead. So you can basically, if you have a lot of cards in hand, you can sort of manufacture a guard out of nowhere. It also draws you a card, which isn't nothing. So yeah, this is one. I think this is more common in Japan. At least the Japanese players, I think.
Yeah, I can see, because it gives you more life burst slots in the deck, and it also just increases the overall card quality because you don't have servant slots.
Well, you would still run servants with this for sure, because the servants are just so powerful. And discarding 3 cards is a very steep cost.
3 cards is a steep price.
That's fair. It's basically the flexibility to, like, if you're in a situation where like you just haven't found a guard, like you're digging to find a guard and you have like 5 cards in hand. You're like, well, I haven't found a guard yet, but the fact that you have 5 cards is still a guard in its own right. So there's a lot of
this becoming more viable too in the future. Maybe if a more grave focused deck. You need to get specific cards into the trash. I don't know if that's ever anything like that will be printed, but
there's a lot of ways to just do that naturally over the game. The best way to do it, honestly, is whatever cards you want in the grave is you just put them into enter and just spend them. The fact that you can enter charge one, yeah, that's like by far the most consistent.
Really easy.
Exactly, yeah. And there are other like looting and salvaging effects, or not salvaging. It's not looting, it's rummaging. But there's a lot of ways to just discard cards naturally. And the fact that your cards that are in the enter also go to the trash is also a really good way to get them. So this is less for enabling graveyard strategies than it is about just kind of having an emergency exit button if you're about to die and you haven't found a guard, or if the game has gone on long and you've used all your guards, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, that's another good one to know about. This is Take Off WIXOSS Robo. Basically, this will give you 5 coins. There are some Elrigs generate coins. Usually, if an Elrig generates coins, it generates a total of 5 throughout the game. You can never have more than 5 at any given time. If you want to use coins on your Elrig that doesn't have one, you can basically get them this way. In Diva format right now, there are not really any good payoffs for using coins, so this piece is basically never used. But it's the kind of one, like, in the future, if there are good payoffs for coins we see coming, it's something to stay aware of. This is actually used a lot in All-Star format for Elrigs that don't really have good coin access, is they basically play a Diva team, ignore the other assists, and just use this to get 5 coins out of it, essentially.
Okay.
All right. Twinkling Eyes of Doom. This is interesting because it's expensive, but so this is a Dream Team piece. We haven't talked about these yet. Do you know the restrictions with Dream Team pieces or no?
I think you just have to have like 3 specific.
Yeah, you have to have 3.
Elrigs, right?
Yeah, 3 different Elrigs. They have to have 3 different colors. Additionally, the pieces that have Dream Team on them cannot be used together. You can only have one Dream Team piece
Okay.
total. And that also applies
Okay.
for like team pieces. If you have a Dream Team piece, you are not allowed to also have a team piece like Endless Punchline. Endless Punchline is a team piece.
Uh-huh.
So it basically, the Dream Team piece, so to speak, sort of like substitutes for what a team piece would be, except with the stipulation that you kind of build your own team with Elrigs that are three or more, that are different colors essentially. And the fact that this restriction exists is also why Mugen is not good, because she is not a colored Elrig, so she's not allowed to use any of the most powerful pieces in the game. But this one is interesting because it erases a Signy zone. So it basically is a lane opener, and also it acts as a form of defense because it's until their next end phase, so they cannot put a Signy in there until your following turn. So yeah, it basically opens a lane on your turn, blocks the lane on their turn, and then on your following turn it will still probably be open because it had been erased until yeah. So it's expensive. It's very expensive at 5. And there are a few Elrigs. There's one in particular that I think there's actually 2, but there's an Umer that just does this as a once per game action on her ability. But again, you have to basically commit to Umer level 3 at that point as your center. But yeah, this is a really interesting piece. Something to keep an eye on, basically. Countdown Heals is really interesting. It is declare class, and then you add a level 1, 2, and 3 Signy from your trash to your hand of that class. It sounds like this is a tribal card, which it kind of is, but there's a surprising amount of overlap in powerful Signy that you would see. I would say most commonly you could like declare something like Brave Signy, because then you could get Romail, which is a level 1 that opens a lane. You get Lancelot, which is level 2 that opens a lane. And you get Nobunaga, which is a level 3 that opens a lane and can get Double Crush. And you just get all 3 of those because they just happen to share a Signy class. So a lot of it just sort of happens just by deck building a lot that classes tend to do similar things. So there are a surprising amount of cases where this just becomes pay 1, get 3 specific cards out of your trash that you're looking for. And it is also the kind of thing that you can potentially use this and like splash in maybe like 1 or 2 cards of a class just to sort of get them at a very opportune time later on in the game. After you, again, something like Nobunaga, we will see her in later on. She's kind of an awkward Signy to play, but you can like enter charge her early on, spend the enter, and then later in the game when she actually becomes relevant, you use Countdown Heals, bring her back to hand, and now she becomes like a big deal that they have to kind of to deal with in the future. So yeah. This is a new piece that is coming out again as of Friday. This one is basically if you took 2 or more damage on the following turn, you get to vanish a Signy and draw 2. If you took 4 or more damage, you get to heal 1. So it's an interesting, really defensive piece. I don't know how well this is going to work out, but it has some unique effects. And it'll be interesting to see, I think, where this one shakes out as far as, again, defensive decks are concerned. And then this is also a new one that's coming out in the next set. Basically, it costs 1, and essentially, for the most part, I mean, there are obviously different effects, but it basically, instead of drawing 2 cards per turn, you're drawing 3. Because at the beginning of your main phase, if you have 5 or less cards, you draw a card. So
yeah, and if you're gonna write, you're gonna be building a deck that can consistently use that effect.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of naturally as the game progresses, especially if you're an aggro deck that just doesn't draw any extra cards, like this is literally just free card advantage. And drawing 1 card per turn after like 4, you're going to use this on turn 1 certainly. So like turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, that's 3 extra cards already. And then turn 5, the longer the game goes, this does become more powerful. So if you're in a slower deck, this just, again, the longer the game goes, this is just more value as well. So it's something to keep an eye on. So yeah, this is I think a really useful, again, and it's not a Dream Team piece. You can just use it anywhere. So it's a really nice secondary effect. I put Water Buffalo on here just because it was the first one I saw. This is a 2-color Signy. It does nothing. It has no abilities other than the fact that it can be used as blue or green in the enter zone. The reason I put this in here, there's a few reasons. First of all, it is a level 1 5k, which is a big deal. There's a lot of...
Big.
Yeah, it's big. There's basically multiple breakpoints as far as Signy power level is concerned, like what makes what are the thresholds for removal. So like 1K is like really small. Like obviously you want to be higher than 1K if you can. 3K is still susceptible to a number of cards we'll see here later on, like Romail and Oigana. So you want, if you can be above 3, usually you're pretty safe on turn 1. 5K is another, is sort of the next step. You're still susceptible to Lancelot at 5K, but a lot of the level 1 removal you will dodge. And then after that is like 8K, and then 10, 12, 13. The fact that this is 5K, it's above the 3K threshold, so it's harder to remove. Additionally, as I said before, a lot of the Enterburn effects will not hit cards that share your center Elrig's color. So if I were to run this in a
that
blue,
gives you an extra color.
exactly, yeah. If I were to run this in a blue center deck and my opponent burns something that doesn't share a color, they can't hit this. So I can still have access to green and protect it this way. It's a way to protect this in the enter zone, which is potentially a big deal, especially if you are like, if you're being really greedy with your color costs, like if you're doing like essentially like a monocolored deck, but you still need blue for like one of your assists that you may grow into. This is a way to sort of get that effect out of it. And then of course Servant. Basically every deck in D, yeah, Servant's always good. You always run 4 of them. There's no reason not to. It's the best way. Like guard effects are really powerful, and this is the only really good way to get them out. Even Garden of Singularity is still, it's too expensive for rate. The fact that this is multi-enter is also potentially a big deal. So yeah.